Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Thank you for joining us. Today is August 28th, 2017. It's 8 o'clock in the morning here in the West Coast, and I'm in Eugene, Oregon, where the air is pretty thick with smoke still. The air quality here is pretty bad. We have forest fires up and down the West Coast that, frankly, I don't think they're trying to stop because there's no money. Anyways, our guest today is a Northwest activist, Nancy Newell. She's a friend of our show. She's been here before. Very excited to have her back. We have very limited time, so I'm just going to get right to it. Before I do, though, I want to thank KEPW.org, an FM radio station here in Eugene, Oregon that is running our show. It'll be on Thursdays at 6 p.m. I think they're just going to be playing one segment of the show. And hopefully they'll be able to put on more. You know, I'm on 4 times a week. That's pretty heavy load for a lot of stations, but I'm grateful for that. And we want to thank our new affiliate for sponsoring our show. And we'll get right into our interview. Thank you, Nancy, for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So as usual, I like our guests to sort of talk about what's on your mind, because you're a person who has actively, for our listeners who don't know you, which is kind of a topic of today, most people don't know of the activists that have been out there making a difference behind the scenes. And you're one of those relentless soldiers that have been after this for a long time. So you helped shut down Pilgrim. Am I correct on that one?
Say which one again?
Pilgrim. Was it Pilgrim?
Trojan?
Did I read? Trojan?
Yeah.
It was Trojan.
And also, the Shoreham nuclear plant never operated in New York. Mario Cuomo, the senior Cuomo, who was governor, decided no evacuation routes would allow them to ever operate it, and he beat the federal government easily on that one.
Thank goodness for that. Well, thanks for joining us. And what is on your mind today? What would you like to discuss?
Well, first I want to bring the good news. The Northwest is working as fast as it can, thanks to the efforts of unions to get Suwan Samuels elected in Seattle City Council, and they instantly almost wrote a resolution to move off of nuclear and get on to renewables and energy efficiencies, and they're moving rapidly in that direction. And that was about 2 years ago that that resolution came through. Also, our mayor recently, Mayor Wheeler, just did the same thing here in Portland, added a few things to it, and the rationale for it is terrific. There's no arguing that nuclear cannot compete. It's a joke. They cannot compete. It's a tragedy and a joke that they claim they can compete with all these other sources we have now. And there's no excuse for running, especially some of these Westinghouse, which has now gone bankrupt. This corporation, International, has gone bankrupt and announced it of March of, I think it was of this year, and that's huge. You know that Westinghouse elected Ronald Reagan to the White House. And we know what that led us to, Star Wars. So that's the very good. Some of the very sad news is that the 28 public utility owners in the Northwest, who are the group that oversees and are owners of this nuclear plant that's 44 years old, same design as the 3 that melted down in Japan, sits on earthquake faults that everybody knows. There are more major earthquake faults where it's located, which contaminates our salmon, destroying our salmon runs. Nobody talks about it. And we have to just keep forcing the issue, and we're getting close, but the resolution's passed on the alternatives, but everybody's hush-hush on closure. And that's what I can't figure out, Lonnie. Maybe you've got some answers on that one.
Well, they don't have any plan for closure. I mean, have you ever looked at the Department of Energy budget for closing nuclear power plants? They allot $5,000 a year for non-emergency closure. There's really there's no money. It's a very expensive endeavor, and so they don't have plans for closure. There's no plans for closure. There is no plan. The only plan they have for closure is if it's an emergency. They don't care. They're not interested in closure. That's what I've decided. Emergency.
We're going broke. Westinghouse went broke. Well, that's good. But the main thing is that the cost that we're expected to pay to keep this thing operating is in the billions. And why are we doing that? Taking away from education, from feeding our children. How many people have we got flocking into Portland? 1,000 people a day because of global warming conditions, no water in California, and other issues. And you talk about the quality of life, you start thinking differently when it comes to nuclear.
Well, you know, this is the issue. You're talking quality of life. They really have no regard for life. Like they're the people that run the nuclear industry, they think it's okay all they talk about deaths. They talk about cancer deaths. Well, it never killed anybody, but they don't talk about the way it interrupts everybody. You're not untouched by the nuclear when you live near nuclear. And frankly, we all live near nuclear. I mean, we have a diabetes epidemic. We have a schizophrenia epidemic in this country. We have children. We have massive amounts of children being born with minor birth defects that are quality of life efforts.
That's true. And I have a picture actually from Dr. Ian Fairley. Have you heard of him?
No. What's his name?
Dr. Ian Fairley, Fairlie.
Oh, yeah. He did that movie, I2... D2 or something like that about the children of Japan. Ian Fairley, I saw that movie. I'm going to look up the title. It's about these children. It basically, when you get tested for thyroid, you get tested on a scale of D1 and D2 and D3 or something like that. Do you remember the title of his film?
No. I'm not good at titles.
Me either. But I'm going to look it up before we get off the line. So, but what about him?
I have right in front of me his latest study. In 2013, he released this study. Several, I don't know how to say it, epidemiological studies.
Yeah, epidemiological, yeah.
Of radiogenic risk at very low exposure levels to, guess what? Radiation. So the workers have the risk of leukemia. Well, now the workers at the CGS plant have finally sued on their health care because the lead of the workers' compensation group in the region where the workers get their coverage are not getting their coverage. So they've had to sue in order to be covered.
Why aren't they getting their coverage?
Well, it's the same reasoning that, of course, the department will go broke and look to the federal government, which, what's his name? What's his awful name? Trump. Well, yeah, he's a Trumper, all right, because he won't give us waste money, let alone the care for the workers that are so sick, calling it a previous health issues. You know how they do that, right? You don't get coverage because that was
pre-existing condition, like a pre-existing condition.
So Dr. Fairley has all the data, and he has taken levels here close to the nuclear plant. Unfortunately, he has cancer himself now, and he is not as public as he used to be, but he did put this wonderful report out in 2013, and it's easily found under his name. Fairlie, Fairlie. And this is a critical issue because the state workers' representatives, the AFL-CIO in Washington, we discussed thoroughly those kinds of issues as well as the deprivation of fair wages because of costs of continuing to operate these kinds of technologies. And it hits the pocketbook all around. So, and then you talk about the military industry and nuclear weapons, and that's 60% of our national budget. So, of course, we're going to be in major trouble. And where do they get the plutonium? From the waste from nuclear power plants. What an easy deal. So you see this whole systemic problem from communities that reaches all the way across the country, even if they don't have nuclear in their state. So why is it that we're so slow at getting rid of this when we have every possible answer, according to Arjun Makhijani, who wrote Carbon Free, Nuclear Free, and he gave me 28 copies in the mail, free, and I got them all over the city council here and different communities so they would start saying more positive things and how easy it is to get off this, because that myth that was created by General Electric and Westinghouse, who's now bankrupt because of the 2 South Carolina plants they were building recently, and that whole project was stopped because it went to $1 billion in a year in cost. And that's the kind of money these people are insanely throwing into their own pockets. We experienced the same thing on Long Island after 3 Mile Island. And luckily, it was a horrible accident. It wasn't fully reported. The cow's skin was peeling off during the accident. We had to get those people to come into the Suffolk County Long Island legislature to testify on the proposed operation of the Shoreham nuclear plant. And we were able to uncover some real stories and start putting some nails in their coffin, we hope would end sooner rather than later. But for some reason, the Northwest is not active on it, doesn't talk about it, doesn't write resolutions about it, and doesn't pass them. And the enforcement is easily done. They hire the Enron guy as the head of the BPA administration.
Pruitt?
He's out of this guy that won't even let me in the lobby of BPA. When I went there just recently with a picture of a Japanese artist's poster with a child's radiation mark coming from the Fukushima plants and the DNA changing. Wouldn't let me in the lobby. The guards did. The guards talked to me, and I gave them all the literature. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't.
What do you mean you couldn't get up? Where were you, and why weren't you not allowed to up?
In the headquarters of the Bonneville building to talk to the administrator who is responsible. Under the 4 governors over 10 years ago of the Northwest said close it. And the administrator was given the authority to hold on to non-closure, but he was ordered by governors to close it, and it still has not been closed. And he comes from Enron to hold that illegal act. So that's why I was in his headquarters here in Portland, in the lobby, with my flyers, trying to illustrate Wyden of the latest December incident, where it was very close to a meltdown situation of the loss of the coolant water because that transient substation, the transmission lines. And then you had the Montana fires. You were talking about wildfires. Remember those huge Montana fires? The transmission lines burned. Did you know that in Montana?
I did not know the transmission lines burned.
Yeah. And guess what they were relying on fully Bonneville, because they haven't been smart and done all the things that easily they wouldn't even have to rely on it. The Columbia Generating Station nuclear plant. Full power. Full power. Knowing that there are definitely parts in there that can transient, like the ash substation. These things happen. I mean, with electricity, you have these things happen. But the condition of that plant after 44 years of operation, with a bombardment, like Arnie Gunderson says, of Fairwind Associates, is questionable. The walls of the plant itself,
questionable.
Of the core,
that's a good way to put it. Questionable.
Yeah. Well, he's a little stronger than that. I don't want to misquote him because I haven't got it right in front of me. But talk to Arnie Gunderson of Fair Winds. He'll give you an idea how it's like the ones in Japan that went. It wasn't just the water coming in. Those plants are not designed for safety. And they've been proven to have poor concrete composure, all kinds of things. So, talk to the experts, and you'll get such terrific information and scary that it's like
Well,
we're
Nancy,
a mental
don't you think that's kind of the issue, is that the experts, not only, it's difficult, to be honest, I have a radio show 4 days a week, and I've reached out to many experts. They're so understaffed and so busy, they can't get back to me. I've reached out to them through Facebook, because we talk, we interact on Facebook, and they're like, look, I'm just too busy. They really, honestly, this is the thing. It's the lack of financial support. And I think this issue with why we don't hear about it in the Northwest has everything to do with Hanford. Everything to do with Hanford. Columbia Generating Station is on the Hanford Reservation.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the military industry, we all know, is
I
horrific.
think we're becoming aware that there is now there has been a coup in the United States. This is why the nuclear, they're really on a death spiral. I mean, I believe that, the options for the United States doesn't look good unless we take a full turnabout and decide we're going to stop the war machine, we're going to stop nuclear, and start focusing our energy on healing ourselves and our planet and making that work.
Yeah, well, think about through the brainwashing that the public has had to go through, even after 3 Mile Island happened here in the United States. And Ronald Reagan was Mr. Westinghouse, too cheap to meter, safety first. All that baloney came out through Ronald Reagan's mouth. And where does he get elected? In California, governor. Mm-hmm. Then he gets elected president, which is questionable whether he truly got elected. But the whole brainwashing of the public I remember when I was a kid, Westinghouse is the good neighbor. You remember that at all?
Yes.
and very, very effective, I must say.
Now they're the company of magic. You should see the commercials now. They actually have the nerve to say, we're creating solutions. They have these super slick commercials that make the world look like Magic Land. And they're like, we're creating solutions for some of the most terrible problems. And don't worry, we'll fix it. I mean, it's super creepy. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, well, and guess who has space stations? I know this for a fact, that they paid for space stations so they can get off the planet and have their children and grandchildren live on a space station. Can you imagine that?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, Jules, whose show is right before mine, the producer of our station, she did a whole series, and she does it, I don't know how often regularly, but you should hear she did a whole series on the Star Wars thing, and I am not kidding you. You think nuclear is scary? That is really scary. Like, the nuclear is nothing compared to, like, the big stuff that we don't know about that they're really doing. It's like, dude, at least with the nuclear, see, the nuclear is just their dirt, their waste, their stuff they don't care about, really. But the other stuff, the big stuff, is huge, and they have no regard for the destruction in their path. They are single-mindedly power-hungry, anti-life people. I mean, if they're people, I don't know.
Isn't it pathetic, though, that they consider that quality of life? We have a space station. We are a space station. Hello? You build yourself artificial space stations where you have an umbilical cord to fresh water?
Right.
Hello? Who's home? Or the guys that go into old missile sites and think they're going to survive everything? Have you heard about this? It was on one of the stations about 5 years ago. I couldn't believe it. It was a condominium in an old missile site underground, and they were so happy. And I thought, wow,
I think that those are big businesses. They're selling them over. There's like million. Haven't you heard? That's a whole new industry. They're building like $1 million, $2 million condominiums down underground. That's its own little industry. So that's part of their long-term protection, to protect themselves. But look, this is the thing. We can't focus on their negativity and their negative attitudes. I mean, here I go again. I know it sounds Pollyanna, but the only way that we can really make this work, love really is greater than fear. And if we believe in the power of our humanity and in the power of that strength, that light we know that's within us, we can overcome the darkness that seems to be enveloping us. It does not have to take us over. There are solutions.
Well, we're already proving that. Westinghouse is bankrupt. That's huge. Huge. I mean, those kind of actions actually took place where bankruptcy had to be declared. They didn't skirt out and get, subsidies from our federal tax dollars. They got it in the nuclear industry, but not to the extent they used to. And it's just the fact that we have to keep the information flowing. That it's like, remember that movie Sleepers with Robert Redford? I think it was called Sleepers. And they said, the key to the future is the control of information. And that's exactly what's happened. And we have to make sure that KBOO doesn't fail, that your efforts don't fail, that they are expanding. We are expanding these things. There may be a lot of misinformation out there, but it's not that hard. If I can find the accurate information in history, anybody can find it, and in any place in the world now. So we do have a lot of advantages that way.
But don't you think that's also part of their the program is to muck it up with? I mean, this is where we have all this division in our country right now. I mean, there are people that thrive on name calling and be mean, or then there's people who you give them an ounce of information and they make it into something that it's not. Do you know what I mean? And then it's very convoluted. I mean, they do this intentionally. This is kind of an intentional thing. But that's part of the program. Remember that movie with David Bowie where he was a spaceman and he came down and he was watching television, that one scene where he was watching 100 televisions on the wall all at one time? And you couldn't really understand one thing, the human, that's what he said in the movie, humans can hear one thing at a time. So that's really what they've done, is like make it so. For example, your neighbors, if you talk to them about closing Columbia Generating Station, what's their response? The people in your immediate neighborhood.
In mine? Go for it, Nancy.
What about them get actively involved, though? What about them doing something?
Well, they have done phone calls. That's one of the main reasons that Council passed those resolutions. They're shifting their money into all the alternatives so that they won't require the grid. Bonneville's grid, Roosevelt made sure it was the world's largest grid. It still is, electric grid. And the public is going independent with their solar, not so much here as in California, but in California it goes all the way from San Diego now to our border and then over to Wyoming, that the alternatives have taken over pretty much. So the understanding of how easy it is to do it, and our weather is conducive to doing the same thing. But we just haven't gotten enough control of it yet. We are getting there, and we have shifted the city council on that. And the only way you can bring in hundreds of millions right now, if you want to be immediate, which we should, is close that plant and stop putting the money in the wrong place. And that's pretty easy to do. So they are coming to the awareness. I flyered all summer at all the block parties, and they have bicycle parkways. That's a wonderful event where hundreds of thousands of people by the end of the summer have ridden through the city on bicycles, and the streets are set aside for that purpose, to educate on global warming. And the myth that nuclear doesn't help global warming is absolute rubbish. Some of it contributes to global warming, but the nuclear getting off it is easy. A nuclear waste, nuclear weapons, all the dropping of nuclear contributes emissions that escalate global warming. So there's your misinformation again. So, but people are becoming a lot more aware of it and participating in it. So for some reason, we get stuck in this state lately, and I'm working real hard on that because I have so many friends that can just give them so much assistance from California that it's really not a problem. So our mayor finally is getting, as the full council unanimously voted rapidly to go forward with this, and we have a very experienced woman, Susan Anderson, in the sustainability department, who is advancing it with projects that are doable and are happening very quickly, including businesses participating, a lot of businesses. So if we can do it parkways, we certainly can advance the other way.
I hope you're right. I mean, honestly, I hope that you're right, that they actively really take. I think the nuclear industry is going to go down kicking and screaming, but they have to. I mean, did you see that article that said that there was a nuclear power plant back east that's being sued for charging its ratepayers for the closure or it hasn't even been built and they're charging ratepayers for it now? So they're being sued. This whole thing, the way they've structured it, and it's becoming, like you said, it's the expense of the cost. Like the Columbia Generating Station is actually operating in a loss, which costs us money because we have to come up with the money to keep them operating. I mean, it's so outrageous. It's like, I think I calculated so that every single employee there costs something like an extra $60,000 a year just to keep on. An extra on top of what their salary is because they're losing money. Every single person that works in that system. So but hopefully that this will shut down before some major catastrophe. The big earthquakes are really kind of the scary part. And every nuclear power facility has this, though. So, look, this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you name drop and you know all these people, right? How does, like, the average person, what would you like the average person across, because it's not just contingent on the Northwest, there's everybody who's near a nuclear power plant. What are the kinds of things they can do, since you found out it's impossible to get in to talk to the people at the power stations? What are effective forms of activism that people can do?
Well, one of our local people proved on, the bee situation with Monsanto and the awful treatment that they have that kills off bees. That's one of the big causes of our loss of our bee population. We have the most powerful bees in the world practically with our pollinators, the mason bee, which is a native bee. And I have a friend who is doing a project, and she recently put on the Facebook a picture of a bee having a wonderful time in someone's front yard. You put colorful marbles in a shallow dish with a little bit of water over it, and they feast on the water, and they have enough water to keep going. And that simple project has now caught on Facebook. She put it on Facebook, the picture. 62,000 people responded in 2 weeks. So that's what I'm trying to do as a new method. I will be getting it up probably in about a week for the contrasting pictures of nuclear versus how easily we can do the other and how least costly, but also appealing in a humanitarian sense and our species survival sense, because everybody is keen to it now. We ain't going to stick around long the way we're practicing on Earth. So that's one tool we have, and I'm trying for that. I've done the parkways over the summer with friends, and we've gotten out to at least 50,000 people, so they've made their calls, and believe me, these calls have an effect. So that's what we have to do.
Our elected officials, what calls to whom?
To council, and that got results with the resolution and the hard work. City Council, Portland.
Portland, right. So in other words, if somebody's living near a nuclear facility and they want to see it shut down, they can call their city council members and start putting pressure on them to start.
Well, and they also talk about CGS and how we're totally wasting money, and we're creating the highest rate of breast cancer in Portland because it comes through the river and the salmon. So we have the highest in the country, Portland does, women's breast cancer, and that gets their attention, and so a couple guys were really snarky at one of the parkways, and I trained myself not to do violence because I have a temper. So I regularly go to different classes and train myself because I was ready to choke those guys riding their bikes and posturing as men about women's breast cancer and being so sarcastic about it. Oh, it was awful, just awful. And men are getting it now. So maybe some of these kinds of individuals be paying more attention. Of course,
well, do you think it's from Columbia Generating Station, or do you think it's from the plutonium plants that used to be, right there? Like there's all kinds of causes because it's on the Hanford Reservation. I mean, Hanford's leaking radioactivity into the Columbia Generating Station. So that's what I mean about Hanford being the non-starter there on why people won't get engaged.
Yeah, but that travels through the Columbia River and the salmon and other fish. So,
Yep, but the thing is, do you think it's Columbia Generating Station or do you think it's Hanford?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sure. They flush they cool the rods, the hot rods with that radioactivity goes right into the Columbia, the water that they flush with to keep it cool.
That's right.
So, hello, you eat the salmon. Hello, why are we losing the salmon? Hello, at such a dramatic rate.
And they're not even testing. They're not even testing for that. They don't test for the radio. This is the where the nut has not been cracked. Like, why do we have scientists who are so willing to be complicit? I mean, how is it that they are so fearful for the loss of their capacity to earn a living that they are willing to throw the health of the planet and the wealth of the planet away? Because once they destroy this, we're going to destroy. I mean, it is really astounding. To me, it is at the heart of the scientists' feet. The scientists are the ones who have an obligation to speak the truth.
Well, and the policymakers. And the truth is there. I mean, there are scientists. You want Dr. Ian Fairley, the fellow I mentioned, when he did that study, I'll read the title, New Powerful Study, this is in 2013, show radiogenic risk of leukemia in workers more than double the previous estimate. Now, that's low-level radiation. That's not even high-level. So if you have a powerful study like that coming out, and it's buried, our government does not accurately measure our Department of Energy, which is supposed to, on the Trojan nuclear plant, they were exceptional because they agreed that that plant should be closed, Trojan.
Listen to what Dr. Fairley said in an interview with Fairwinds. This was reported on Fairwinds Energy Education on April 2nd, 2017, just this year, right? And posted by Norman Pilon in the Corporate Malfeasance Current Affairs Nuclear Energy on the Fairwinds page. Just picking up this one point that he says in this interview, it says tritium, the radioactive isotope and byproduct of the nuclear power generation, is making headlines with notable leaks at 75% of all reactors in the United States, including Indian Point and Turkey Point in Florida.
Yep.
Tritiated water, tritiated air, and organically bound tritium.
There you go. And I'll get back to that. The women run around and race for the cure in Portland. You know about that one, right?
Yes.
And they put their money into these research cancer institutes instead of the prevention, and immediately supporting the closure of the plant that produces waste. We have no place to put it. And now they're going to run it along all the highways in the United States. This is the latest proposal, serious, coming out of our Congress, almost being passed recently because of Trump's administration. So we have all the studies, we have all the evidence, and the people know this. I mean, there has to be an anxiety that, wow, we run around for a race for the cure, but they will not discuss nuclear power plants or the causes resulting from it. The prevention end of it, they won't discuss. Why? That is a highly funded, and then they just found out the crookedness of one of the leaders of Race for the Cure. But this is an intent by the women to bring attention to the fact that this is breast cancer. Hello? The source of milk and life. Goodness gracious, we let that slide by and we don't prevent it? What's happened to people? Is there such a feeling of depression and anxiety with these nuclear accidents? They're not even understandable. I mean, Hawaii reports all this stuff. They're reporting the results of those 3 plants in Japan melting down and what problems they've got with their fish. They report it. We're not reporting it. We're not reporting it.
Not only do we not report it, we don't really discuss it. It's very, very distant. Even people living in an area where the nuclear power plant where it's leaking. I mean, when you consider 75% of all nuclear power plants are leaking tritiated water. And then in this article, they talk about the term called rainout. That's when a nuclear power plant drops tritium on itself or on a nearby community. And nobody looks at it. It just sits there. And they're not even talking about the tritium, like what's going on in New York. No one even talks about it.
It's not good for the market.
Well, because the NRC tells us that tritium isn't a problem. They say that they tell us it's no big deal. And the other part that Ian talks about in this article is that the tritium actually evaporates and goes into the air. Like we're having tritiated air.
That's part of it, but all the people that try so hard to get true press on breast cancer and the causes, it is having results where people here, organic foods are in Fred Meyer's and, all these different markets that stuck up their noses at the benefits of real organic foods and all the cancer causing from the soils and the water ingredients that they have in them and the chemicals that are used by Monsanto. But you put all that mess together, but there has been such a burst of organic farmers in our state, and we have protected it for years with tilth, luckily against Montana, but they're under constant stress and pressure. So there is this whole series of people that definitely are active on it in ways that they feel they have some control. Where the problem comes is they can't get accurate information easily, except for a program like this. They can't get immediate results and try to change their everyday life so that they don't have to be scared and worried all day long and go to a job that sometimes is very difficult to do and raise their children and be away from home when the children return from school. There's so many pressures in modern day life that shouldn't be happening in the United States that people kind of come into a state of, well, let me deal with this now. And I think that's a big part of it too. And, there's a denial aspect where Susan Coleman's group said to me, that's not relevant. Prevention is not relevant. I mean, it was like, okay, are you a cash cow? What exactly are these women running for? If you don't prevent it, what exactly are you proving? I mean, great, you're in great shape, but it doesn't stop the cancer from starting. So what is it exactly that you want to avoid?
Are you talking about Susan Coleman, the cancer person, Susan Coleman, that person?
That's Race for the Cure. I think that's her name.
Well, they don't want a cure. They want patients. Let's get real. If they really wanted to have a cure, there are cures. That's the point. This is the point of my frustration. There is ways to remediate the radioactivity. There is ways to really, I mean, we could do all of this, but the point is we're talking about a culture that has just been, I don't know, brainwashed for greed, I guess. I can't figure it out. And they're like Ian Farley. I mean, Ian Farley's been doing this for quite a long time. And if you listen to him talk, his movie that he did with the children of Japan, I think it's A2. I've been looking for it. I can't find it. A2D2, or maybe he had to take it down, or I don't quite remember. But there was some story about something going on with that movie that he had. But when he's been doing this, I mean, Chris Busby, the interesting thing is that these are not the people that, like, this is why it's good that what happened in the Columbia generating station, where the workers are finally fighting their insurance companies to be covered. That is going to highlight more than anything else how horrible the nuclear industry treats even the people in its own industry. Yeah,
and here's an odd statistic that I found out while I was flowering up in the Tri-Cities right near the plant. I talked to a midwife there that's the head of the birth center there. And she will not talk about radiation. And that city, one of those cities, Kennewick, is the fourth fastest growing city in the United States. That's how desperate people are for work.
Nancy, let's be clear. The Fred Meyer in my little town of Eugene is selling organic and non-organic watermelons from Hermiston, Oregon. Hermiston is right across the river from Hanford, right downwind. And less than a month ago, we saw an article. I read an article on a day when I didn't have a guest on about how there had been plutonium going across the highway. Now, Hermiston is right downwind of that highway. And here we are less than a month later buying their watermelons. I mean, it's not just the women in that town and the people across. It's the food suppliers. They're still selling tuna. Let's be clear, 100% of the tuna tested positive for cesium-137. They stopped testing because 100% kept being tested positive every time they tested.
Right.
So
that's why I don't find so much.
I know, but this is the point of well, you can find some. I mean, I have been able to find a few, but they're grown in the border, near the border of Mexico, and you wonder what else is down there. I mean, this is the point. When we look at what we've done, the nuclear bomb testing basically made the United States a nuclear waste zone. They did Chernobyl a million times over during the 50s. This is why this is why the NRC is sticking to the rule of it's not going to harm you. It doesn't do anything, because they know if they start looking everywhere in this country, the entire population has been affected. The entire food supply chain has been affected. Everything is affected. So they can't possibly assume it's impossible. They're not. When we talk about a revolution, we're going to have a complete collapse of this government. That's what I think. Before the industrial military complex has got to cease before we can face this.
Yeah, that's been obvious for years. However, the extent to which people go into denial is just for sheer day-to-day activities. Knowing all this, we're more educated than we have been in the past, and try to function within an atmosphere of such difficulty, especially with radiation, because you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't touch it. And that is What the Bleep is the movie that I think of. Have you seen that movie, What the Bleep? Came out maybe 10 years ago. Do you remember that?
No.
They were talking about radiation, and there was a fellow that was a Japanese photographer. And he took pictures of water in different toxic areas of the world, as well as in Japan. And it showed the actual color images of what radiation does to water and certain chemicals. It was amazing, his photography. But his message was positive in the end, because if there is this sense of healing in a way of consciousness, which I can understand, because when you're fighting a serious illness like cancer, it's very hard to keep positive and upbeat, especially with breast cancer, when that's such a damage to the whole origin of the female species, and to keep that consciousness of what's known as, and it's kind of not a good word to use, I can't think of it better, but positive energy within your own mental framework. With all these complicated issues we have created, especially the United States, responsible for it, to try to restructure a cell with better health. And he did prove that with his photography, and I researched his book, and he's got a book out, and I haven't got that in front of me because someone took my book when I went to an event. And now I'm missing another book when I went to an event, and I leave it on the table when I speak. But the information is there, and if people can pull up What the Bleep on some of the Amazon and those different Netflix and things like that, you will be fascinated with what people have done around the world. So this Japanese man had gone to a lake with several, not a very large lake, and used the level of consciousness and meditation that they had reached to see if they could change the nature of the water, and they did. And that's proven scientifically. So
you mean just through their meditation?
Yeah, and holding hands around this. It was a really small lake, but yeah. But it's really strange that somehow these books, while I'm speaking, disappear, and I have to remember to secure them someplace else because they're popular and you can't get them very easily now. But definitely look up a Japanese photographer related to radiation, and you should be able to find it. And he's definitely in What the Bleep, if you can find that movie.
Okay.
And it's fascinating. And it gives people hope, and definitely, we've always proved some people seem to be able, and I'm not negating anybody's efforts, don't get me wrong, that you try your best as a human being in whatever way you can, and they say that love is a much more empowering force, and I truly believe that. And it's very helpful to keep us from not just giving up. Because so many times I've just wanted to give up because one guy came to me. This is the guy responsible for one of the public utilities that runs the nuclear plant. 28 of them are unanimous on continuing running this after this ridiculous event that happened in December of last year, and so many things happened to prove to them they're dealing with worse than a nuclear bomb because they can't get the core reactor secured enough. And they proved that in Japan with 3 reactors. So, and this guy comes to me after I make a speech to all these 28 public utility owners. They have their Energy Northwest board meetings. And he says to me at the break, oh, well, I just returned from Japan, and, they really made a big mistake. That will never happen. I said, what was the mistake? When they were trying to react to the meltdowns? He said, well, they used bicycles to get between the plants. But we have SUVs here, and we wouldn't have had that problem. Now,
really, that's what caused it, is them using bicycles, not the design of the plant or the tsunami.
Right. The ability to slow down those from melting down would have been saved by SUVs.
What's he going to do when there's a big 7.0 earthquake right under the Columbia Generating Station and the whole thing cracks and we start to have a meltdown and then everybody has to evacuate and even has to evacuate Hanford? And then we can't get to Hanford. What are we going to... See, to me, the threat of the cost and everything else at CGS, for me, the fact that its proximity to Hanford makes it the most urgent nuclear power facility to shut down, even more than Diablo Canyon, because not only is it on an earthquake fault that's active and we expect to have a massive earthquake. I think they said at least a 9.0, but let's just say it only has a 7.0. It cannot sustain past 6.4 maximum. The fact that it's so close to Hanford is, to me, the outrageously insane part of even continuing to operate it.
Yeah, well, it's like us filling our house with garbage and saying we have no place to put it and continue to produce garbage. That's what they're doing. There's no place to put it. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants it near them. People come up with ridiculous ideas that they know don't work. Why are you creating? You don't have to create it anymore. You've got the biggest nuclear reactor in the world. It's the sun, for one thing. You've got wind. You've got energy efficiency. You've got all kinds of answers that don't accelerate global warming. There's no excuse. Absolutely none. Now, 28 public utility owners. So, Seattle has gone off, but they haven't said close the plant. Why? Same thing with Portland. They've gone up, but they haven't said close the plant. They're in process in Portland. Seattle is well on its way of completely removing itself independent of the plant. Well, that doesn't close it because they're subsidized, and they continue to be subsidized. And they brag as if there's some big, successful corporate entity. Public power people, 28 of them, don't talk about closing that plant. What the heck is that? And, Roosevelt initially started Bonneville because it was to benefit people that were starving to death in the Northwest to have something to advance them, some projects, and then he believed in the capitalist system and industry, and he himself experienced illness, and he set up Social Security. So we need an FDR today that does the balance here in the cities and at every level of government and political office. And that's up to the people. So that's why I keep believing, as exhausted as I get. And I'm starting to show, they say after 27 years, you really start to show the exposure, because I was there during that accident and, about 60 miles out. So it's starting to show up a bit, but I've done some wise things.
I would say that one of the things I'd like to do on the tail end of you talking about all that is to remind people Congress is coming back in session in September 1st. They'll be back next week. We really do need to contact all of our officials. I've contacted them all in Oregon. We really need to put more pressure on and remind them to stop co-sponsoring and do not vote for the Nuclear Waste Policy Amendment Act of 2017 that is going to privatize our water rights. It's going to take away federal water rights, local and state water rights, and privatize nuclear waste and eliminate the need for environmental impact reports when they're transporting waste. and putting in new facilities. It is really, they're privatizing the nuclear waste. This has got to be stopped. And I think they're planning on just putting it through the House and then putting it through the Senate, and nobody's going to pay attention. And I hope that we can get people to really pay attention to this one, because this is going to be, you think it's catastrophic now? Wait till private industry has all legal rights to dump nuclear waste in our rivers and in our waters. And they have we are giving the government, the federal government is giving up their rights to the water. That is outrageous.
Yeah, you're saying that's already done, or you say the bill is
coming up for a vote. It did not get voted on before the summer session ended. It came out of committee right before summer session. It didn't hit the floor. But, this is one of the ways that they're selling it to Congress as a way to save billions of dollars. This is when they're talking about federal tax cuts, when they're going to do their tax cut plan, they're looking at ways of how can we cut the budget? What can we alleviate from the responsibility of the United States? This is one of them. And frankly, I don't think that we actually need to have private industry having complete authority over nuclear waste that is generated with subsidized tax dollars. It's an outrage. That's
really just another way to make money for them. That's all. That's the whole
thing. It is, but it's also a way to really poison us without, it's going to be one of those things that like, oops, we didn't know. Yes, you did know. And the fact is we've caught them red-handed with the car keys in their hand. They're like teenagers, who've stolen the car. We know exactly what they've done, and we have got to stop them.
Well, Biden initially started his career on cancer, and he's known to be against a lot of these policies. Who's our leadership here that should be called to make sure that bill doesn't go? Because he's got a lot of power as U.S. Senator.
Out of Portland. He's in Newport. Who's your guy? Schrader, isn't that his name? Schroeder?
No.
Your congressman?
Blumenauer.
Who's your congressperson?
Earl Blumenauer. And he's good on.
I think Blumenauer is one of the co-signers of this bill. You need to call them up and say, there's Johnny Come. Yes, we really do need to put pressure on them in the Northwest. All of DeFazio's has not signed on, but I've been calling him. He's my congressman. Schrader, he is one of the original co-sponsors, and I actually faxed to him. I went to Donna Gilmore. I've had her on twice in the last few weeks because of this. She has a santanofreesafety.org she has kind of a cheat sheet. She read the entire 72-page, I think she said, legislation and meted it down and found all this stuff. And she created some talking points, a 2-page bullet point that you can print out. And I just fax it to their office. I can call them up and say, hey, I'm faxing you information that you need to know, because this is so outrageous.
So you get this on, do we want to announce the numbers to call or anything on today or no?
Well, I could find them. I could actually find them. But the thing is, there's people all around. It's not just in the Northwest, but people need to just go to the Congress and just call Congress. Call your congressman. Do some legwork. Find your own Congress people, and also call up your city council and let them know that that's coming in, and the governor's office. And say,
what's the bill number?
3053. It's HR 3053. And it is the Nuclear Waste Policy Amendment Act of 2017. And Congressman Shimkus has basically wrote it. And you can tell he didn't write it. It was written by the nuclear industry. He handed it in. I mean, the way it was written is outrageous. Before the break, they said they were going to take out that little clause that took away federal water rights, but it doesn't look like it's been taken out. According to Donna Gilmore's rereading, she updated it post the closure of the session. She updated her little cheat sheet. So what they're saying, this is why it's so important for us to all come together and decide that we're going to really give it our best attempt to make it work, to stop these people, because we can stop this legislation before it gets way out of hand. Because if we allow this to go, it's kind of like the FCC. We had no idea what it would mean when Bill Clinton said that only a few corporations could own the media. And now here we are. on an alternative radio station that barely struggles. And by the way, people can actually contribute to UCY.TV. Go to our webpage and make a contribution. I strongly recommend it because we could use the support. And also go to kepw.org if you can afford that also, because independent radio and independent media needs help because of the megalithic changes that happened when Bill Clinton privatized basically the industry. So we really have to save ourselves. That's kind of the issue, I guess.
We are, and there has been excellent reaction by the public on the small modular reactors, in spite of Corvallis allowing a bankrupt French company to come in and convince them to go ahead with design plans and set up a special study group in the Corvallis Oregon State University programs. And we fought them off in the legislature and won on no money support for SMRs here and in the state of Washington. So the public has showed up in ways and numbers that made a big difference. And we can continue to do that. We should not leave people believing that things cannot be changed. They can be changed, they can be stopped, and we have proven everything we said 40 years ago. It all works. We got the answers. We don't have to do this awful nuclear stuff anymore.
That's right, and we can demand it. And by the way, I found the title of Ian Farley's documentary. It's called A2BC.
Oh, that's an interesting title.
Yeah, that's why it's a weird name, because it's hard to find it, but it's really great. It's about the growing numbers of thyroid tumors on children exposed to radiation after Fukushima in March of 2011. It was really interesting. Very sad, these very poignant little times where little boys were sitting on the sofa giggling and chatting about knowing that they're going to die when they grow up. They're going to die young.
Yeah. One of the things that concerns me in the state of Oregon is we've lost Dirk Dixon, who used to be the head of the state DOE in Oregon and a specialist on radioactive. He worked on Hanford issues for years and brought in the right information, was very diligent in his work, and he's retired. He may have been under pressure. I'm not sure. I shouldn't say that, that I know of that, but he has retired. And the fellow that came in, guess who the governor appointed? Somebody that knows nothing about radiation, and he wants to know everything he can possibly find out. And so contact him. He's now in Dirk's position in the nuclear division of the Oregon Department of Energy. So call the Oregon Department
of Energy. Okay, we'll look it up, and I'll look that up. We have about a minute left. Is there anything else you want to squeeze in the last minute?
Yeah, just shut the plant. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. It's easy to do. Call your even if we're Portland, but we're on the grid, and we can tell Vancouver, you're right across the river, stop voting for continuing this plant, and we'll cut your business. Things like that. Just call them up, and I've done that, and I've embarrassed them in public in their conventions and all kinds of things. So come to one of the meetings, Vancouver PUD, look it up, run across the river, and give them hell. And that's what I'm advising.
Okay, then. So are you talking about Michael Kaplan? Is that the person you're talking about?
In Vancouver?
At the Department of Oregon. We have 30 seconds left. I don't want to waste my time with someone that I'm not familiar with. But I want to thank you, Nancy, for joining us. It's really been a very thoughtful hour. I hope you'll come back again, because we really do need to rouse the troops, so to speak, and keep everybody's spirits up. Put your courage feet on, you guys. Take some action. Do what you can. And it really does matter. We'll talk with you again tomorrow. Thanks, Nancy.
You're welcome.